my fellow bards. So, you've just seen the rotation and the general flow of it with some notes about everything. What I wanted to do in this section is to provide commentary about the rotation and kind of take it step by step in a slower pace for any of you that, some of you may just want the rotation aspect, and so that's why I included it first, but in this we'll kind of pick it apart and I'll offer information and my thoughts about it, and hopefully we'll get to, I'll cover everything I need to. So we'll go ahead and jump straight into this, and I'll just be pausing this video and talking as we go through it. Alright, so starting right off the beginning, we have our opener here. So this is, regardless if you pre-pot or not, this will be your opener. The question of whether we use the pot on the beginning or we use our first pot 2 minutes into the fight ultimately depends on the kill time of the encounter, whether you would use it at 2 and 8 versus on pull and at 6 or whatever. That depends, like I said, on kill time, on party comp, all that good stuff. The ultimate goal is that you don't lose a usage. So if you use it 2 minutes into the fight and then you lost your second pot because you killed it, well then you would have rather opened with a pot and then used your second at the 6 minute mark, etc. So the basic idea of this opener is pretty simple. We open with our first dot here, our Stormbite, and immediately we go into a Bloodletter and then Wanderer's Minuet, and then we use our second dot, Caustic Bite, we hit Inferior Arrow and Raging Strike. So this is something you'll see different depending on the information you're getting and what source. Most you'll see use RS and Wanderers in the same, in that first GCD window right after the first dot. I like to split it apart, and it ultimately doesn't really hurt anything, and it gives us a little bit more room going back into the 2 minute burst, so we can make sure to get all our abilities off, and we're not panicking to make to grab a like RS like right before the GCD and potentially clipping or something like that, because I've had weird issues. So I like to just use it the right after our second GCD. And then of course the moment we hit our third GCD, we immediately use Battle Voice and Radiant Finale. So these two will always be used together no matter what. On my skill display down here at the bottom, you won't see the Radiant Finale on it. You'll only see the Battle Voice because it's not updated to show that icon. Same for Blast Arrow, you won't see it on the skill display. But yeah, the idea is after our third GCD, we always Battle Voice Radiant Finale. And of course, in this opener picture, I just have these burst shots here. These could be Refulgence instead, just depends if you're hitting the straight shot readies. And then another mention is this weird looking icon right here. It's I split in half a Pitch Perfect and a Sidewinder icon and put them together, because sometimes you'll get Pitch Perfect right here after this barrage, and what I prefer to do is use the Pitch Perfect as soon as it's up. That way I'm not potentially missing a Repertoire stack. But you can use either one, as long as whichever one you use first, you use the next one as soon as you can after your next GCD. That's ultimately the most important part of that. So you can switch those around, just whatever feels right. Sometimes you won't get a Pitch Perfect there, you just hit your Sidewinder. So it just depends. And of course, we go through, the rest is like normal. It's just using our Bloodletter stacks and, Burst Shot Refulgence, using EA on cooldown, and we make sure to snap our dots. We use Iron Jaws. If you don't know the term, it's known as snapshotting. And so for short, kind of abbreviation of it is just snapping, or snap. And so we make sure to snap those dots right before they all fall off. So all the raid buffs will be up, and then right before Raging Strikes, Battle Voice, and Radiant Finale fall off, we make sure to snap those, and we're also snapping all the other buffs from our other teammates. So it's really important to playing Bard, is to make sure we snapshots, because for the next 45 seconds we'll get those more powerful dots ticking. They'll have all the raid buffs that were up at the time we snapped applied to them for the next 45-second duration. So that's really big. But yeah, this is just our typical opener. It's not very complicated, just take a little bit to get down to muscle memory. And then probably the other most important aspect of playing Bard is this song cycle rotation right here, this 43, 34, 43. So this has been determined based, the mathematics, or the mathematicians have all come out and they've showed us that AP is a slight potency gain over Mage's Ballad. So we want to stay in armies for the full duration and we want to cut Mages short, but we still want to stay on the 2-minute track because it's very important that we stay on the 2-minute cycle. Bards are very strict to that cycle. So with that being the case, we cut out of Mage's Ballad after 34 seconds. And an easy way to think about this is, instead of thinking about it, okay, I stay in this song for 43 seconds and then I stay in Mages for 34 seconds, reverse that and think about it at the times you switch. And it's much easier to keep track of because you have a tracker in the game showing you. So instead, basically there are 2 seconds left of Wanderer's Minuet here when we switch. There are 11 seconds left of Mage's Ballad here when we switch from Mages to AP. And then once we're in AP, there are 2 seconds left when we're switching from AP to Wanderer's Minuet. So 2, 11, 2. That's ultimately what you're aiming for. And that's way easier to think about instead of trying to subtract in your head. It's just knowing at what second in the song you're switching. So 2, 11, 2. All right, and so I think that covers all the opening stuff. Yeah, so let's go ahead and continue. To make a note of this, just in case it's not known. So when you use Barrage, it gives you that that barrage proc that triples the damage on the next weapon skill, and that's important. Meaning, after you hit Barrage, you can use Pitch Perfects and you can use Sidewinders. You can use anything that's an ability, and it will not eat that buff from Barrage from you. Any weapon skill though will eat the buff. So like Apex or Blast Arrow. So what you can do is Barrage and then, pop a Pitch Perfect or pop your Sidewinder, and you don't have to worry about it, killing that buff off of you. And that can be really useful to know in the moment when you're trying to get all your abilities on cooldown again, but you're trying to be careful around Barrage to make sure you don't misuse it. And then right here you'll see I'll snap right at 1 second. And this is a little tracker. I have the one that says 1 second for Radiant Finale because I know it's the one that expires first, because I use Radiant first before Battle Voice. So I know once that is at 1 second, everything else is about to fall. And so that's when I'm timing my snapshot to, that you could see with my Iron Jaws right here. And then everything else is going to fall off within the next GCD. And that's ultimately the opener. And it's pretty simple. It does take some practice to getting down into muscle memory. So going forward here, like I said, you can proc Repertoire every 3 seconds, and your goal is not to waste a proc. Now this isn't really a big deal in Mage's Ballad or AP. This only really applies in Wanderer's Minuet. And what I mean by this is, you can say EA is coming off cooldown and you use it as soon as you can, and you get your 3rd stack of your Pitch Perfect, and then you use your Pitch Perfect. But you take into consideration that EA might have just come off cooldown, but in the next second you technically have a Repertoire proc chance. And so by using EA without waiting that 1 second to see if you've got the proc for the 3rd Pitch Perfect stack, you've wasted 1 Repertoire stack essentially. And that's what I mean. And I have an example I'll show a little bit further into this where I do exactly that. I wait that 1 second, get the stack, use it, then EA. So the other parts of this, otherwise, you use EA on CD, use Bloodletter on CD, use Pitch Perfect at 3 stacks, and of course, all throughout this video and whenever you're playing Bard, we always refresh dots between 1 to 3 seconds. Alright, so right here you can see my EA is about to be off cooldowns 2 seconds from it. And you'll see that so my muscle memory is built to where the moment something comes off cooldown, I'm hitting it. I'm already hitting it before typically it's off cooldown. But because I know dots, the repertoire proc happens every 3 seconds, I know that at 12 seconds left in Wanderer's Minuet is a repertoire proc chance. So, that's at, counting from the bottom, that's at 3 seconds, 6, 9, 12, 15, etc. So I know at 12 seconds I have a chance to get this 3rd stack for my Pitch Perfect. So what I do is I wait a second to see if it happens. It does happen. Then I Pitch Perfect, and then I use EA. So just small little considerations like that can give you just that extra little bit of edge of damage. That is kind of super optimizing. But if you know when those repertoire proc chances happen, then you can use that to your advantage. Alright, so at 2 seconds we switch into Mage's Ballad. Now you can see here my switch doesn't technically happen until 1 second, and that's because I wanted to get off this, I believe it was a 3 stack Pitch Perfect here. So at 3, I got my 3rd stack of my repertoire, so I used it, hit my GCD, and then the switch happens at 1 second. So sometimes depending on where your GCD is and when you're using that Pitch Perfect, it will delay you by that 1 second. It's not a huge deal. Make sure to get your Pitch Perfect in before you switch, and just try not to clip anything. Alright, so everything else in Mage's Ballad is pretty simple. We're just using EA and Bloodletter, Sidewinder all on CD. Really, the most important aspect of being in Mage's Ballad is making sure we use our apex at the correct time. So I have this ticker right here that I've created so I can kind of get used to the muscle memory of knowing where the 1 minute mark in a fight is. And so this tracker I have right here will run out right at the 1 minute mark. Of course, I could use the Mage's Ballad song timer to track that 1 minute mark as well. And ultimately that's what most people will do. So the goal is we want to use our apex as close to the 1 minute mark as we possibly can. And this is so we make sure that we can build our gauge all the way back to 100 before we go into our next burst phase back into Wanderer's Minuet. So the longest you can sit without using it in Mage's Ballad is the 22-second mark left of time remaining. So if you know, like if your next GCD is going to hit right at Mage's being at 22 seconds left, you're going to want to use an apex there regardless of how much gauge you have, because otherwise you're going to throw off your gauge building for the next minute, and you're potentially not going to have 100 gauge during your burst window, and that's gonna hurt you a lot in terms of damage output. So we can see here I'm at 95, I hit my 100, and then I go ahead and use my apex right there. I have the blast arrow waiting. I'm just going to hit refresh my dots, and then I'll use the blast arrow on this next GCD. And that's something you can use to play around with, knowing that when you use apex you have 10 seconds to use that blast arrow. So it's the important aspect is making sure you get the apex off no matter what at the correct time without going too far in over the 1 minute. And of course you need to use the blast arrow and not waste it, but it does give you a little bit of flexibility because usually a dot refresh is coming up in the middle of that. So typically I'll apex, dot refresh, blast arrow, something to that nature. And that's pretty much it for mages. Getting ready to switch here at 11 seconds. This, if you're using EA on cooldown, throughout the entire opener and up to this point. Typically EA is coming off cooldown right here at this 11-second switch. So what I like to do is I'll switch and then EA every time. Even if EA is like up about 1 second before, I'll make the switch first and then I'll EA, and that way I can go ahead and get a jump start on that skill speed increase in armies. Alright, and so EA is, for lack of a better term, it's a pretty boring song. It's really, other than our AoE damage, AP is really the only big issue I have with Bard, and in that it's just not a very interesting song. But another way to look at this is during AP, you get to kind of breathe, you get to kind of pay attention to what's going on around you, figuring out what your next moves are about to be, and kind of prepare for the 2-minute burst mark. So it's kind of a little bit of a downtime, like a breathing period for you to say, okay, I'm ready, and get ready for the burst again. So depending on your perspective, it could be a good thing. For me, it's not very active, so I wish it was more interesting. But like I said, it is very simple. We switch to AP at 11 seconds left of Mage's Ballad, like I said. In this, we're mostly just using Burst Shot and Refulgent spam. Getting ready to go back into Wanderers, we want to make sure we have at least 2 Bloodletter charges when we make that switch into Wanderer's Minuet. And so there are some different ways you can manipulate this around. You don't want to just sit on 3 Bloodletter charges for 10 to 15 seconds. That's you're going to end up wasting a Bloodletter stack at the charge at that point. But the goal is to have at least 2, and then by time you're dealing with all your Wanderer stuff, you've probably gotten your 3rd during that time. We use EA on CD as normal. When we get Apex and Wanderers, we hold it. Doesn't matter when you get it. You don't touch it. You let it sit there. This feels really bad, especially if you've been playing Bard for a while in Shadowbringers. It feels bad to sit on Apex, but that is the play. We sit, we hold it, we wait to use it under raid buffs again. And so, I mean, that's pretty much AP in a nutshell. We just kind of sit back and chill, hold 1, use a Refulgent if it procs, and we just get ready to go back into our bursts. So you can see here I have 2 charges, and I'll use one of those charges because I know I have 15 seconds left of AP, and I have 1 charge, and I'm about with 11 seconds left. So I'll know I'll get my 2nd charge by time I'm in AP, and I know I'll hit that 3rd one as well before the end of my burst. So that way I can make sure I get all 3 under the burst window. Alright, and then a thing to mention here is if, for instance, say that this 2-minute burst is when our 2nd pots are being used. Say this is the 6-minute mark. If that were the case, you would want to use your pot at the 6-second mark of Army's Payon. In another way to say that is you use the pot in the GCD window that AP hits 6 seconds. And that way you hit a GCD, AP's at 6 seconds, use your pot, because you can only put 1 in that window with the pot. You hit your next GCD, and then AP will tick down to 3, and then 2, and we'll switch. But yeah, this just a side note, if your 2nd pot window, you want to aim to use that 2nd pot once Armies is sitting around 6 seconds. And then we switch. Alright, so after we switch back into Wanderer's Minuet, there's a lot of shit we got to deal with, and there's not much time to do it. So this is probably the hardest part of playing Bard, because we have to make sure we follow the right steps to get all our buffs up, all lined up correctly, and then we need to go through and dump our Barrage, our Sidewinders, our Bloodletter stacks, our Apex, our Blast Arrow, and everything under that. And then at the end we make sure to get a snap off. So the way I like to think about this is that when we switch into Wanderer's Minuet, this is our GCD 0. So right after we switch, we wait for the GCD to roll back around, and then we hit it, you know, a burst shot, or, you know, a refulgent, depending if we got the proc. So after that first GCD, we want to use Raging Strikes, so you'll see I'll use it here. We hit our next GCD, and here I use EA. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It just depends. If you don't have full gauge, like if you're sitting at 95, using EA right here is really good. But this is right before the third GCD, so this is the second GCD window. We don't use like our bloodletters, we don't use Apex, we don't use Barrage or Sidewinder, and those should be on cooldown anyway, just around here. We're just waiting to get to that third GCD, and so we hit it here, and then we're gonna pop our Radiant and our Battle Voice, and then our next GCDs, which will be the fourth, we'll go ahead and use our Apex. So you'll see my gauge get spent there, and then right after the Apex you can go ahead and hit Barrage and Sidewinder. It doesn't matter which order, and then I'll use that Refulgent on the next GCD with that Barrage buff on it. Then I'll go ahead and use my Pitch Perfects and one of my Bloodletter stacks, and then I'll go ahead and dump my 2 remaining Bloodletter stacks, and you can see that I got 3 total Bloodletters all under this buff window. And then from here we're just back to the exact same. It's just this little period of these first 6 GCDs, you have kind of this priority system where you need to, we switch at 0 being Wanderer's Minuet, we wait 1 GCD, we hit Raging Strikes, we wait 2 more GCDs, and then we Battle Voice and Radiant, and then starting on our 4th is when we just dump all our damage. The reason for this is everyone else in our group will also hopefully be aiming to line up at that exact same GCD, so all the raid buffs will be up after that. Well, all the other raid buffs from our group will be up during the 3rd GCD window, and then by the time we're hitting the 4th GCD, all raid buffs are up, and we're all just dumping our damage out. Of course, there's a lot of flexibility and variability about that, depending on your raid comp and when you're strategizing buff windows and stuff. But ultimately, this is what you want to aim for on Bard. And the nature of Bard, it's very difficult for us to deviate at all because it is very strict, and so we don't have a ton of flexibility with us as far as like delaying raid buffs or things like that, because if we do, we lose a ton of our damage. And so, like I said, treat Wanderer's Minuet as your 0 GCD, and then by the 3rd, well, during the 3rd, all buffs are up, and on 4th, everyone's dumping their big burst. And of course, at the very end of it, before all those raid buffs fall off, you can see I killed the target dummy before I got to, but I would have refreshed on the next GCD here. I would have snapped again in order to capture those dots under all those buffs, just the same as we did in the opener. And from there, for the next 2 minutes, it's exactly the same thing. It's repeated, ad nauseum through the rest of the fight. Nothing changes. So this is just that 2-minute segment, starting from the opener all the way to the end, going back into the burst, the 2-minute window, going through that segment, and that's it. That's exactly what you do on Bard, and you just rinse and repeat the whole thing. Now, there's always going to be, this is made around full uptime fights. If you're having to deal with fights that have downtime, it could be a problem. You have to kind of figure out how to deal with those. Like I said, Bard is very strict, and so downtime phases kind of hurt us now more than ever, and we don't have a lot of options to deal with them. So just kind of the nature of how Bard is. Personally, I love Bard at the moment. It's my favorite it's ever been. But I'm not blind to those small little annoyances and things we have to deal with. But overall, Bard feels very, very busy, a ton of fun, and I love it. So hopefully this was helpful, and I'll catch you guys in the next video that I end up doing. Thanks for watching.